Good evening, I'm Hafiz Marzukhi. Our top stories for tonight. Trump expects decision from Hamas in 24 hours on ceasefire in Gaza. And the latest on Trump's tariffs, countries to start paying on August 1st, some as high as 70%. All this and more coming up on AWANI International. US President Donald Trump says it will be known within 24 hours if Hamas agrees to accept a proposal for a ceasefire in Gaza. The Palestinian group, however, is reportedly seeking guarantees that the US-backed proposal will ultimately lead to a full end to the war. Hamas officials met on Thursday in Istanbul to discuss the offer, later issuing a statement that they were talking to other Palestinian factions before making a final decision. According to two Israeli officials, details of the deal are still being worked out. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is expected to travel to Washington next week to meet with Trump. Meanwhile, Gaza authorities reported dozens more killed by Israeli strikes across the territory. Donald Trump says his administration will begin sending letters to trading partners to set new tariff rates, which would take effect on August 1st. The US president says around 10 or 12 letters would be sent on July 4th, with more to follow in the coming days. The letters will go to countries without a deal in place before July 9th, the end of a 90-day pause on Trump's reciprocal tariffs policy. Trump said the tariffs would range from 10% to as high as 70%, but gave no details on which countries or goods would be targeted. So far, the administration has announced trade deals with the UK and Vietnam and reached a truce with China after earlier tariffs triggered a trade war. On Thursday, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said the US was close to a framework deal with the EU that could avert 50% tariffs on all EU exports next week. Now, this week, Trump confirmed the July 9th deadline would not be extended.
Letters out to
We'll have more after the break. Stay tuned.
Di dalam setiap berita yang dibawa, konteks amat penting. Kami sentiasa membawakan yang tergempar dan terkini. Pastikan Astro AWANI menjadi pilihan anda, tidak kira di mana sahaja anda berada.
US President Donald Trump says no progress was made in his phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Thursday, amid stalled efforts to end the war in Ukraine. He adds that he plans next to speak to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky later today.
For Russia and Ukraine, are you speaking to Zelensky tomorrow? And what are you hoping the next?
I'm speaking to President Zelensky tomorrow, early in the morning, and I'm very disappointed with the conversation I had today with President Putin, because I don't think he's there. I don't think he's there. And I'm very disappointed. Well, it's not, I'm just saying, I don't think he's looking to stop. And that's too bad.
The call, which the Kremlin says lasted over an hour, did not include discussion on the US decision to pause weapons shipments to Ukraine, a move announced just 2 days earlier. Trump has denied completely pausing the flow of weapons, but blamed his predecessor, Joe Biden, for depleting US defense stockpiles. He added that America must guarantee its own military readiness. Just hours after the call, a Russian drone attack sparked a fire in an apartment building in the northern suburb city of Kiev, indicating little change in the trajectory of the conflict. The Kremlin also said Putin reiterated that Russia would not back down from its war objectives and that peace talks with Ukraine should remain a bilateral issue without US involvement. The US Congress has passed Donald Trump's sweeping tax and spending bill, marking a major win for the president's domestic agenda. After a lengthy session, the House approved the bill on Thursday, by a narrow 218 to 214 vote.
The Senate passed it earlier on Tuesday by a single vote. Trump had set a July 4th deadline for the Republican-controlled Congress to send him the final version and is expected to sign it into law during a ceremony on the July 4th national holiday. The bill includes $150 billion for border security, detention centers and immigration enforcement, with another $150 billion for military spending, including Trump's Gold Dome missile defense system. But the largest cost comes from over $4.5 trillion in tax cuts spread over the next decade. The Congressional Budget Office warned the bill could add $3.3 trillion to federal deficits and leave millions without health coverage, a claim the White House disputes.
In a fresh escalation of tensions, the US and Colombia have recalled their respective envoys. Washington made the first move by calling home its top diplomat, John McNamara, citing statements made at high levels of the Colombian government. The Trump administration said it recalled McNamara for urgent consultations, adding that it was considering additional measures to express its growing concerns over the state of bilateral ties. The State Department did not specify which comments prompted the recall or what further actions might be taken. In response, Colombian President Gustavo Petro announced he was recalling his ambassador to Washington for discussions on the country's bilateral agenda. He cited priorities including climate cooperation, migration policy, and anti-narcotics efforts. Trump and Petro previously clashed in January over Colombia's refusal to accept military aircraft carrying deported migrants, prompting the US president to threaten tariffs and new restrictions. The US dollar index plummeted 10.8% during the first half of 2025. Now, this marks its steepest 6-month decline in over 5 decades.
After surpassing 110 at the beginning of this year, the index entered a sustained downward trend. Throughout June, it was consistently below the 100, hitting a low of 96.3 on Tuesday. The US media attributed the slide to concerns over slowing economic growth, persistent fiscal deficits, and aggressive debt expansion. In addition, pressure also came from tariff policies and inflation challenges of US President Donald Trump's administration. These confluences of factors triggered accelerated depreciation of the index.
The Israeli military is preparing an enforcement plan to ensure that Iran cannot return to threaten Israel. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz says the military must be ready, both in intelligence and operations, to prevent Tehran from rebuilding its nuclear and military capabilities.
He made the remarks to senior officials following a 12-day conflict that began on June 13th, when Israel struck Iranian nuclear and military sites in which the US later joined. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump said Iran wants to meet very badly and that he is open to talks. He earlier stated that the US is not trying to hurt Iran, but wants to see it function as a country again after the strikes. There have been mixed reports on the extent of the damage following the strikes, with Trump claiming the sites were obliterated and Iran downplaying the impact.
China has imposed duties of up to 34.9% over 5 years on brandy imported from the European Union. The tariffs, effective July 5th, follow an anti-dumping probe launched last year into mostly French cognac. However, companies like Remy Martin and Martell & Co., which previously agreed to minimum price commitments, will avoid the higher tariffs unless those terms are violated, said China's Commerce Ministry. China's probe into brandy imports came after the EU accused China of giving its auto industry unfair subsidies and imposed duties on imports of Chinese-made EVs. French cognac makers, meanwhile, said they have been caught in the crossfire of an escalating EU-China trade dispute. According to France's cognac industry body, cognac exports to China have dropped by as much as 70% due to the trade dispute. Russia has become the first country to formally recognize the Taliban government in Afghanistan, announcing it has accepted an ambassador from the group. This move marks a key milestone for the Taliban, which has faced isolation since seizing power in August 2021 amid grave human rights concerns. Moscow's foreign ministry says it sees strong potential for ties and will continue supporting Kabul in security, counter-terrorism and anti-drug efforts. It also saw significant trade and economic opportunities, especially in energy, transport, agriculture and infrastructure. After the US withdrawal in 2021, Russia was among the few nations to maintain a diplomatic presence in Afghanistan. It removed the Taliban from its terrorist list in April 2025. Afghan Foreign Minister Hafiz Marzukhi welcomed the move, calling it a courageous step and expressed hope others would follow. No country has formally recognized the Taliban since its 2021 takeover during the US exit from Afghanistan. However, China, the United Arab Emirates, Uzbekistan and Pakistan have all appointed ambassadors to Kabul, signaling steps towards recognition. South Korea's trade minister says he may seek an extension on the US tariff freeze, which is set to expire soon. Koo, who was appointed as South Korea's new trade envoy last month, is due to hold talks in Washington on Saturday with US Trade Representative Jamieson Greer and other senior officials. Yo said the substance of negotiations mattered more than the deadline. He added that he would ask the US to accelerate talks to reach what he called a win-win deal. Seoul is seeking exemptions from President Trump's sweeping tariffs on imported autos and steel products. It is also trying to negotiate a 25% reciprocal levy announced by Trump in April. In a parliamentary hearing on Friday, Yo said the US was pushing for better access to agriculture and automotive sectors, as well as improved digital market access and non-discriminatory treatment. The two countries had agreed in April to work towards a deal, reducing tariffs by July, but negotiations have stalled amid political uncertainty in South Korea. US President Donald Trump has signed an executive order to raise entrance fees at US national parks for foreign visitors. The White House says the additional revenue generated will raise funds for conservation and deferred maintenance projects.
The executive order directed the Interior Department to increase entrance fees paid by park visitors from other countries. It, however, did not say by how much or when the new rates would come into effect. The order also directed the Park Service to ensure that U.S. residents are given priority access over foreign visitors in any of its permitting or reservation systems. The move came despite the Trump administration seeking to cut national park spending by more than a third. It remained unclear how many of the Interior Department's 433 parks units would be affected. Currently, only about 100 sites managed by the Park Service charge for admission, with fees varying.
In a rare rebuke against China, India says only the Dalai Lama and his organization have the authority to identify his successor. Its Minister of Parliamentary and Minority Affairs, Kiren Rijiju, made the statement ahead of visiting the Dalai Lama's base for the religious leader's 90th birthday on Sunday.
Rijiju told local media that no one had the right to interfere in the succession process, emphasizing that only the Dalai Lama and the organization he founded hold that authority. He will be joined by other Indian officials at the birthday celebrations in the northern Indian town of Dharamsala, where the Dalai Lama has lived in exile for decades. The comment came just days after the Tibetan spiritual leader reiterated that only his Garden Podrang Trust can name his successor, despite Beijing's claim that it must approve any reincarnation under its laws. The Dalai Lama has also said his successor would be born outside of China. In response to Rijiju's statement, China warned India against interfering in China's internal affairs through Tibet-related matters. India-China ties have been strained since a deadly border clash in 2020, but have been slowly improving over the years.
That report wraps up AWANI International tonight. Stay tuned for our reports on the rivalries, strategies and the shifts behind the power affairs driving the new global order. Visit international.astroawani.com for more. Be sure to follow our social media accounts at Power Affairs. I'm Hafiz Marzukhi. Thank you for watching. Have a good weekend.